Hi, I'm Pete Symons. I'm very happy that drawing is at the heart of the AUB. It's kept me gainfully employed for many years because I have taught atelier-style drawing and visual studies within animation and many other courses. So thank you very much, Violet, for inviting me to chair the panel and be with these amazing guests. So I'm going to ask the guests to introduce themselves. So Anita, if you'd like to start.
This is always difficult, isn't it? Well, I'm Anita Taylor. I'm the Executive Dean of Bath School of Art and Design at Bath University. That's the long title. I'm also the Director of the Drawing Prize and the Founding Director. Since '94, I run a project called Drawing Projects UK, and I'm also a maker of drawings and artist. That do?
Yeah, yes,
Hi everyone, I'm Caroline Burraway. I'm a practicing fine artist. My BA was drawing at Camberwell College of Art and my MA was fine art at Central St Martin's. And I've kind of been doing what I do for a long time. So, that's it.
Tanya.
And you're the winner of the prize.
Sorry, I'm just going to wrap that. Okay, yeah, and I'm the winner of the prize.
We can come back to, yeah.
Just wanted to big that up.
Okay.
It's an amazing contribution to the show. My name's Tanya Kovacs. I'm an artist and I also write about drawing, and for several years I ran the MA drawing at Wimbledon, which is part of University of the Arts London, and I've recently made a change to become Professor of Drawing at Bath Spa.
Hi, I'm Simon Grenell. I'm an artist as well. I paint and draw, and I'm also the course leader for MA Fine Art here.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Okay, and Simon, I think we're going to start with you. You're going to talk a little bit more about the drawing at the AUB, but also launch the first sort of conversation. We've got about 30 minutes, by the way, to talk. So we're going to only scratch the surface of quite a few things, I think. But then we absolutely want you guys to join in for at least 15 minutes or so. So I hope you are taking notes, ready with your questions, please. Thank you. Simon, to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on Christian's points about the new BA in drawing, really. I think a lot of courses at AUB are broad-based. I think I work in fine art and I work with Lisa in illustration, and the BA courses are the same sort of philosophically. I think what's interesting with the drawing BA is it's unique in a way because it starts off from this kind of medium-specific position, which is quite unusual for here. But I think, as Christian said, the university, everybody's kind of at it. So drawing is a key part of all of the courses here. And I think it never ceases to amaze me the sort of incredibly broad ways that it's delivered. And I think particularly at the moment where many courses have lots of international students, and also on the MAs as well, we see there's a lot of kind of mobility in learning, I think, at the moment. And certainly on illustration and fine art, we're seeing lots of people coming onto the course who perhaps haven't done first degrees in our subjects. So you have to be, like this prize really encourages, you have to be really kind of open and agile as to the way you teach these things. And also to help encourage, particularly international students who actually come with an awful lot of experience, and sort of welcome them in a way that acknowledges the sort of biography that they have and the contribution that the sort of currency that they already bring with them, rather than just sort of coming and getting a UK education at BA or MA level. And I particularly welcome that. I've had airline pilots, male nurse, architects, costume makers, and I think drawing is robust enough to kind of cope with all of that and beyond. And one other thing I wanted to say is, as Christian said, that Professor Sian Bowen is not here, which he apologises for, but she's been fantastic. She's again managed to bring very gently, I might add, very persuasively, lots of different courses together. Last year she was based with architecture, this year she's with fine art. but she's always sort of mindful to bring people together. So we've had students from illustration, animation, costume, architecture, fine art, illustration, and also staff from all of those courses. There's no sort of sense of any kind of discrimination whatsoever. You know, it's you just have to try and keep up with it, really. So that saw a fantastic exhibition in the gallery, and then some of us went to Venice, which was fantastic despite the weather, so we had sort of then led into a fantastic opportunity at the British Pavilion at the Venice Biennale, and I think there aren't many of us who can say that we've actually stood there. But that went fantastically well, and I think the pavilion staff themselves were quite taken aback actually at just how well the staff and students from AUB worked with, you know, the pavilion staff. And just to share, I think we had over 2,000 people through the door. So hopefully it's something that might be repeated again, really.
Yeah, I thought the one with the staff was amazing because it kind of brought everyone back to playing again. I know, Lisa, you were there as well. And for me personally, having taught in a certain way, to then be able to play in another way and open up all those possibilities again. Yeah, Anita, you've talked about this many a time, you know, about how that all comes around. I mean, Anita, we kind of stick to the education side of just for a minute, it's okay. I know you've defended the idea, or not defended, or encouraged the idea of teaching drawing. And I know this is a big subject that we could spend hours talking about, but if we can just sort of touch on it for a minute. What is your sort of position on that? Because for me, I teach didactic drawing. There's much more open ways of teaching drawing. You've got some...
In terms of,
I think within a teaching environment, yeah.
I see drawing as a fundamental primary means of expression and communication. So it would make sense that it permeates everything in whatever form is appropriate to a subject or a discipline. Perhaps I can talk a little bit about why we set the project up, co-founders in the room, who we both worked on a painting course, Paul Thomas, in Cheltenham in 1994, and we were teaching drawing in a very systematic way, history, systems, practices of drawing. And we kind of felt that what became quite challenging was finding a model for students to see drawing as a valid, valuable, active, exciting activity. That sounds really crazy to say that now, because you all are in a room with great drawing around you, great teaching, great investment in drawing. But in the 1990s it was quite a different place. So the project itself that you have the exhibition of here was set up with a really clear question, which was to find out who was drawing, what were they drawing, how were they drawing, and how did we think about drawing, how could we start a dialogue, a discussion about what drawing was today and how it fundamentally worked within people's practices. So the project has at its heart an idea of education, and that's why it's always had a very close relationship with universities, schools, colleges, both through education programs around it, but actually physically being there, supporting people to make drawing and celebrating them, but also celebrating the act of drawing itself. At BASPAR, I've worked in... before BASPAR, I was at the National Art School in Sydney, which its DNA is drawing, it's at the centre of everything it does. And before that, I ran Wimbledon College of Art, which had the Centre for Drawing and the MA in Drawing that we all know. At BASPAR, what's absolutely brilliant is every course draws. It's throughout all of our programmes, whether it's textiles or graphics or fashion, furniture design, all of those things, fine art, obviously. But we are just about to start a BA drawing and an MA drawing, and the BA drawing is very certainly not just art and design. It's very much about the primary means of communication and expression across a range of disciplines. It may start in that space, but what we want to do is have a programme that celebrates drawing and its role as one of the most ancient means of communication. It does transcend cultures, it transcends disciplines, it is something that we all have a relationship to. And I think in terms of building that, there's space for every system of making drawing, whether it's an atelier style life drawing, whether it's about understanding how we communicate, how we plan, how do we form diagrams,
research
how do we gather research, etc. So I think for me, it's that wonderful moment where we've been able to finally catalyse something which shouldn't deplete anything else happening. It should just extend that dialogue, and for me, across the university, because we've opened out some of the units across so that students can also be working in biology and find out about how drawing relates to what they do, as well as the students going the other way, for instance. So that's probably too longer.
No, that's good. No. A good segue into the
That's good.
Yeah. You were talking earlier on, this one, about coaching as opposed to lecturing. Can you?
Yeah, I think, funny enough, I was talking to Steve Dutton, who's at Bath as well, at a private view for an exhibition he had organised, and we were talking about some of the problems with teaching, and actually I've got a quote here.
That's handy.
Which will give you a kind of example. This is from a fantastic book on Roger Ackling, one of my heroes. It's by in an essay by Dave Musgrave called Recollections of a Lens, Roger Ackling's lens he used to use. He says, I realised that I sometimes became the kind of tutor I didn't appreciate as a student. Perhaps pretentiously, I always thought of myself as an artist while I was studying at Chelsea College of Art. Partly for that reason, I was highly resistant to the helpful sort of tutorial in which a list of artists you've never heard of, short stories, philosophers, poems or avant-garde films you'd never find alone, is suggested to you. The kind of tutorial, to borrow Thomas Pynchon's analogy, that suggests the geography of your ignorance. The kind of teaching is my default setting. I thought that was really interesting in mind with this conversation with Steve, because he'd just been on this life coaching course, and he said, well, it suddenly dawned on me one day, well, why not think about, instead of being a lecturer, is actually being a sort of sports coach instead. And that just made perfect sense, because it seemed to suggest, and rather, I love the line there about the kind of geography of a student's ignorance, rather than saying to somebody, okay, well, you're here, you're a painter, in order to have to be sort of taken seriously, you need to be looking at these theories, looking at these artists. That sort of model just sort of breeds a sense of kind of lacking within the student, rather than the sort of coach model, which is saying, actually, okay, well, let's start with you. What have you done? Where are you from? And I've never come across a single student, including a retired police officer, who wasn't able to draw on some huge kind of well of experience. In his case, it was surveillance, that they could actually bring into their drawing or their other practice.
That's cool. Tanya, in your wonderful book, I was asking about a quote that I'm going to give you now, but you said it's actually more about how you collected and talk about other artists, so sort of following on from this breadth and where people are coming from. And you're saying that you draw on paying attention to others and others' drawings. Can you kind of expand on that bit and how that comes together for you?
Well, I suppose a drawing in itself is already paid attention to something. That's what kind of birthed the drawing, that you've kind of noticed something, you want to point at something, or you're trying to worry your way through something and understand it more to make the drawing in the first place. And I suppose I've been long fascinated not just by the drawings of artists, but by the drawings of makers, architects, designers, children, outsiders, cartographers. I mean, it's a very, very long list, because I see it as a very democratic form that belongs to many people. It's an evidence of thinking. Drawing is how we kind of prove one thing to someone else, firstly to ourselves, firstly to the person making the drawing. And I've been lucky enough to make a number of publications where I've been able to explore that at greater length, and actually kind of collect a set of drawings around various themes or ideas and try and unpick them in a way that I hope communicates to other people, and that also offers the invitation to anyone else looking at these publications. You can do this too. This isn't like some weird connoisseurship or expertise. You know, I've been given the opportunity to do it. But drawings have a sort of accessibility that lots of other art forms just a couple of steps back. You know, there's something unintimidating about looking at a drawing. It's often an entry point for all sorts of people into visual culture. You know, people aren't as scared of them, either to make them or to look at them. And they invite unravelling, because often you can see the way into a drawing and the way out of a drawing. They often have a transparency and an immediacy. And I know I'm generalising, and you should never generalise about any art form whatsoever, because there are lots of drawings out there that aren't transparent and are really dense, and, you know, spot them as well. But there are also quite a number of them where you can just kind of unravel them and enjoy that time you spend with them. Because I suppose that's the other thing, combining the invitation to look at a drawing and possibly read something about that drawing's story attached to it, its narrative, that also invites you to slow down, which I think is another really special quality about drawing. And as soon as I say slow down, I think of a really fast gesture that you can make with the drawing, but I'll contradict myself. But there is this sort of kind of de-acceleration, which as a drawer is very important to me. The experience of making a drawing and what happens to time when you're making a drawing, I think translates when you look at a drawing as well. And certainly just the joy of looking at some of the things out in the gallery, that you kind of slow down to meet the drawing, is a very special experience as well. Is that
something to do with like the final not worrying about the final destination of where it's going? You know, like that kind of painting, you might be already thinking this has got to be for an exhibition. Is there something about the final destination that frees you up? And because, you know, I'm thinking about in terms of the show, obviously it is fun, you know, this is where the work gets onto the wall. But a lot of the, I think, for me, a lot of things you're talking about are because you are just free to do the things and not think about whether it's going to go in an exhibition or whatever, and that kind of creates all those sort of things you're talking about. Is there anything in that?
Some drawings are very open-ended and maybe never finish. I know you were talking about that before. And some drawings have much more kind of presentation status. And again, I know that within my own practice. Some drawings, very open-ended, and I'd never show them to anyone else. Some drawings are made quite systematically, and they have a very clear endpoint and a very clear sense of presentation to them. So again, it's really hard. It's such a wide spectrum of activity. Really hard to generalise.
Well, you were hinting there. A question for you.
Well, I think the reason my drawings come into being are, I think that I don't think it matters whether it's a drawing or a painting. I think when I was taught drawing, it was very much about the beginning of an idea, the end of an idea, and the journey in between. That was what drawing was. Whichever medium it took was really quite immaterial. But the drawing is the artist's mind, if you like, and you can see I think, which is why drawings are often much more interesting than a painting, which possibly all the interesting and the workings out in the mind of the artist has gone into the drawing, and then the painting gets done as a finished article. So when I look at something, perhaps in the National Gallery, I'll kind of veer towards the drawings because that's where I see the real workings out and what's gone on. For me, my drawings are never finished as such. It doesn't matter whether they're finished or not. They, you know, at some point I decide I'll put the charcoal down or the rubbers or whatever. But equally, I get them back into the studio and I would take them out and start to work on them again. So they sort of are in constant flux, and that's okay. Yeah, they go on the wall here, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're finished. But you know, at some point you make a decision. For me, the drawings come into being because I began, I'm a drawer, if that's sort of the word for it, but I did move into film and worked with film for quite a few years, and then ran into problems showing the film, which, because film's a very immediate language, and if you're dealing with difficult subject matter, which all my work is sort of dealing with the marginalised, the displaced, and working in and from sort of these zones of vulnerability, which can cause a lot of moral and ethical questions and problems from myself and from people looking at it. And when I was doing my MA, I ran into problems showing my work, which was with film, and I was looking at death at that point. And so I decided I would go and do these massive drawings that would literally smack people in the face. They couldn't turn away from them. They couldn't stop me showing them. And it would make them stop and think about what they were looking at. And I think where drawings, or the painting, the drawing, comes into being is that it allows a sense of space and a sort of time of meditation when you can look at the work and you can start to enter the narrative, and if you can see yourself and your own baggage that you inevitably bring to a piece of work with you, so you'll start to read something of your own small kind of history within it. And that's really important if the work is trying to say something to you. So it's trying to ask questions of you, and you ask questions of it and of yourself. And if it works, then it's working. If it fails to do that, then it's failed for me as a piece of work. So that's kind of why I do the drawings. They're to make people, they're just a visual language, and they're to make people think, and that's really their job.
While I've got you talking, can I ask you a little bit more about the ethnic
Process.
field notes, the beginning, how that fits into what you're doing?
Yeah, so as I said, I work with sort of the marginal, the displaced individual, and look at their sort of everyday existence in the world that they're inhabiting. And it's not enough for me to sort of take that material. I do take it third hand, from documentaries, newspaper, wherever it is, and there's a lot of it out there. But as far as is possible, I, for my own sense of validating what I do morally and in lots of ways, I go to these places and I meet the people and I spend time with them, and I try and gain their trust and their friendship. And once I have their trust, I try and this sort of ethnographic, principle behind it is that rather than as maybe an anthropologist, which is more, I would say, possibly more of an objective, scientific stance, I want to work in collaboration with them. So we're both as important to the work as each other. Saying that, I understand that really isn't real, because we don't come from we don't come from a sort of equal partnership, because I'm coming from my own privileged sort of power position, and they have the sort of coming from their abjection, and so I'm working with people in very vulnerable situations. So that tension between the empathy that I bring and the intimacy and the objectification of looking at it and that critical distance is really important, and I'm constantly aware of it. And it brings up many, many issues, sort of moral and ethical considerations all the time. And so, but I feel it's very important that I, at some small level, try and understand their life. We can never put ourselves into somebody else's body and experience. We can't. But all you can do is what you can do. And that's where I sort of come in and try and build up some kind of relationship with them. Because my work is about bringing awareness and debate to issues which people perhaps don't want to spend time with. We're bombarded by so much of this, and that's just, so that's how I enter it. And then I take all that footage home back into the studio, and then I work with the film, and then I do the drawings, which take months and months and go on, and there's no time scale. If I do one a year, then it's one a year. If it's two a year, it is what it is. I don't worry about that, because that's not the point. Yeah.
It's fascinating. It's from film as well, not just photography, but using film. So
Yeah. I've been working the last year. The drawings here were from the French refugee camps, people I met there, but the last year I've been working in the Greek refugee camps, and I've done a film with a young Syrian, which is really heartbreaking but amazing. And they're amazing people. one has to, I suppose what I'm really calling for is for people to view the work and have this humanistic, that's so important now. They're not just these data collecting figures and statistics. These are people with voices and stories. And the faces of Samuel and Eden in the exhibition are not portraits. They are the faces of all the people and all the human stories and all the voices. And that's really important that we understand that and see that. So that's that's their job, hopefully.
It's knowing that when I noticed it was their names, just their first name.
Yeah.
For me, that was very brilliant. It's just about not.
Well, I was talking to to Anita before, because I've always found titles incredibly difficult, and then used to do everything was untitled because I didn't want to give people. I wanted them to find their own way into the thing, but sometimes you have to. After speaking to a professor of drawing, he said you've got to give people a way into what you're doing, to allow them to kind of enter the story, be part of the narrative. So it was just to put their name, put where they were from, and hopefully that was enough, for
Thank you.
But what we were actually talking about in that context was that Caroline assumed that in the selection process the selectors would have known all of that. And I think one of the things that over the 20-something years of looking at all these thousands and thousands of drawings is actually one of the critical things is actually about how much we read from a drawing. So when a drawing is really successful, it's actually containing all of that information, even if it's just an invitation to think about it more, which I think in the context of your drawings was that. Because all of this work just comes in and we see drawings in the real, and we're really interested in our relationship to the drawing as an artefact, in terms of its invitation of scale, touch, surface, subject. And all of those thousands of drawings are seen just as drawings. So it's about reading a drawing, responding to a drawing, understanding whether it's inviting you to spend more time with it. And then finally we round it after the work is selected to put together all the information around it that you then get in our beautiful catalogue. But that context isn't put there before the selectors. We want them to, I think Cornelia Parker called it a workout for the mind and eyes, brain and eyes, because actually you're really testing people's capacity.
I think you're one of the only prizes that doesn't do the first cut with digital work, which is really interesting because actually, my work's seen this big, looks like, and people go, oh, it looks so photographic, and you're thinking, well, actually, if you look at it, you see it's all about the materiality of drawing. It's all in there, and you need to see that, and you see that because they come in straight away. You're faced with the actual work, and that's a very different experience, which is interesting.
As we come on to that now, do you think you could tell us a little bit more about that selection process, like who the judges are? And,
well, the exhibition, every year we have a different panel. So most importantly, and the panel select the drawings. They respond, in a way it's very invitational, it's propositional. They respond to the drawings that are proposed to them both as drawings and as good drawings, etc. The panel this year were Nigel Hall, the sculptor, who makes exquisite drawings, Megan Piper, who's a contemporary art dealer, working with a lot of senior career artists from the 70s and 60s primarily, but very engaged in visual language, and Chris Stevens, who's the director of the Holborn, who was a curator at Tate Britain until maybe he's been at the Holborn for a bit more than a year, but he's an expert on Hockney and all sorts of, he did the very big Hockney show, which was their most visited show in recent years. So.
And then a little bit more about...
Do you want about the process?
Yeah, I think, and also leading on to the by itself and the change of name.
The process is straightforward and complex, as you've heard me say. I mean, we collect drawings in from all over the country, so we provide submission centres all over. We bring it all together into one place, and the process is to see the drawings. They don't walk by you. This isn't about a split-second decision about whether it's a good decision. And Tanya's been on the other side, so we set it out. So we set work out systematically, going through the work, choosing and holding back work that interests the panel. They see the work independently and come together and say, we want to hold that back. etc. So we encourage them to keep what they find of interest at that first invitation, and then gradually we're whittling through the work until they're down to around 70 drawings. So there are 69 drawings in the show by 67 artists. It includes moving image, it includes all sorts of things that came in, some things with collars and cuffs on in frames, and some with that you unroll and find something spectacular. So Gary Lawrence's drawing, which is the other major award winner, is a drawing that comes in a roll, and they're a surprise every year when they come out, and they're really amazing. But the process is to whittle away, choose drawings. They then shortlist works that they find of particular interest, and they choose their major award winners. By this point, they don't know anything much about the work, but they just...
Do you fight over it, Tanya? Is there fisticuffs going on?
Oh, I don't remember fights. I remember levels of exhaustion that I don't choose to remember. And there was a point where I just thought I'll never make another drawing again, because there's obviously too many of them out there. But then you find another kind of like wave of energy to go again, look again, think again. We all had a wild card. That was our way of avoiding arguments.
Yeah.
So you had to kind of protect your wild card. That even if the other two judges were just like, no, but even that kind of there was just a very organic consensus. No doubt about the year I judged. No doubt about who was going to get the prize. It was there was a kind of ecology to the whole process. Really helped by how well the logistics are managed, because physically moving drawings, unrolling, putting them up, or not just drawings, obviously, because there's film, there's sound works, there's all sorts of things. The management of the logistics really helped. Just pace everything, pace your thinking. And it's important to be aware of, obviously it's subjective as well, but every time you submit to something like this, it's just about a particular dynamic. It's not necessarily a kind of personal rejection or falling in love with your drawing. It's about a particular kind of moment and ecology to that particular selection process.
And we should say we take great care to put together a panel that probably often don't know each other. Yeah. You didn't know your panellists. But we try and get people who will have a respect for the way that other people think, because the only thing we want them to do is think about drawing and what it means, what they think is a drawing. Is it a good drawing? How is it connecting? And for them to have that consensus around a group of drawings with wildcards, but something that comes together. The thing that's different about this year, and we should talk about Trinity Buoy Wharf Trust, and the change of name, as the project started in 1994. We had a whole range of sponsors up until 2000, and we sought a major sponsor from then, and we were really lucky to have 17 years of funding with the Joa Charitable Foundation, which was really about building capacity for the project, giving it really good legs, and really putting a place for drawing as a language, as a discipline, as something to be really excited about, and it's fantastically exciting. And Joa, we reached almost £1 million of funding for drawing. So the time had come for them to think about, they had supported it to the next level. This is absolutely right. And we were incredibly lucky. It's obviously a year of 20s to find that Trinity Buoy Wharf Trust had a 20th anniversary, and they wanted to celebrate that 20th anniversary with a major investment in a project. And we were incredibly lucky to meet them. The timing was amazing. They're incredibly committed to drawing. And Trinity Buoy Wharf is a wharf in London opposite the Millennium Dome, which has a historic... It's in Tower Hamlets. It must be the only bit that wasn't bombed. It has a lighthouse and brilliant maritime buildings. They also house the Royal Drawing School's Foundation course, and they are the headquarters for the Big Draw. So it was a bit like finding drawing central for that part of London. And they wanted to mark this with drawing. They're absolutely passionate about the role of drawing. And one of the things that we introduced late into the cycle, because it was a ready-made project, a bit as it was with Jerwood, and then some minor development of the portfolio and brief for it, was to develop a working drawing prize. So we also have in the show a working drawing award for the first time alongside the student awards, which encourage students to participate and to draw and to be rewarded for them. Next year we anticipate, because that was announced quite late in the cycle, that we will build a bigger profile for that part of it, not changing the dynamic of the exhibition, but actually thinking about how do we reward drawing as a thinking medium. So about research, about proposition, about planning, about how something develops an idea. Partly because shows can become about the finished thing. I don't think it ever has been entirely, and there's nothing wrong with drawing as a finished item, that drawing can be the means as well as the form and all of those things. So for me it adds that really exciting, interesting dynamic. It places it in a place where we can engage with schools, and that's one of the briefs, is to engage with children who probably are not getting what they need in the curriculum at the moment. The EBAC is causing enormous challenges to the teaching of art and design and all the creative subjects. And I was at a dinner in the House of Lords earlier in the week talking about creative education and the challenges that it now faces, along with the funding review for higher education. So this brief, to get drawing out there in the community as an incredibly democratic thing, I agree with you entirely, it's something everybody can engage with, and it's something that can generate creativity in anyone and everybody. And the thing that I'm constantly astonished by, so that brief is really exciting. How do we get into schools? Because I believe in higher education and in society, we do actually need to get out there and make sure that we have a creative future. We know that our creative industries, whatever we think about the phrase, are booming, but we're not supporting it through the education system and through education policy. So this project has always been a vehicle to think about how do we bring something into a new domain, into a new public dimension, and it's done that from the inside, bottom up, for artists and makers of drawing. That has been its primary objective, always with this side element, which is how do we get drawing into the curriculum. We started with how do we deal with it in higher education, knowing that the way we rolled it out and the way it tours across the country, everybody could use it, and it's used by, the visitor figures can be astonishing. In certain, one year in Devon it had 40,000 visitors. I mean, that's bonkers, isn't it? It was a bonkers, and there is a reason for it. But actually, schools use it as a way to get kids to think about something that isn't frightening, something they can all relate to. But everybody uses it, and Drawing Projects, does something similar. It's about building a community through drawing. It's about providing opportunities to see drawing, to talk about drawing, to make drawing, and to think about what that means to being human. It is about that engagement, and the thing that I'm always, not just the people who, if you do an event on drawing, everybody comes, it's amazing. People will travel from all over the world to come to an event on drawing in remote places. But actually it's the dialogue, and it is something about the community of making that's really important. And I find that really quite interesting, that people really like to draw in silence together. It doesn't matter, they don't know the people in the room and they might never want to engage with them. There's something about that process which is really exciting.
You're talking there, but
sorry.
The thing is, but the thing is you've very conveniently brought the conversation right round full circle, because the what you're talking about is not the atelier, life drawing, whatever. It's actually about the process of thinking. And that can be in all subjects. And that's kind of getting around the STEM thing, that they're going to need to do that within other subjects as well. That's what you were talking about as well, I think, earlier on, Simon, is that. And I like the idea that it's going in that way, so with the working drawing, with the research study, and not just about the finished fine art drawing. So it's very nice bringing it all around. Which I think means, yes we are, look at that, perfect timing, how about that?